Vanakkam Dohadeva and everyone. Wonderful to be with you. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Well, nice to be here on Mahashivaratri time at the monastery. We're just 2 hours before starting Mahashivaratri, so we haven't started yet here. 5:25, the day of Mahashivaratri. And we'll share the screen. There we go. Slightly off the monitor there. February 19th in Asia. Our first topic is answering questions sent to satsang@hindu.org. Could you please explain the ego death? What it is? When does it happen? How do we feel when it happens? Is it a gradual process, or does it happen all of a sudden? Does it happen before or after self-realization? Can we do something to quicken the crush of the ego shell? That's a lot of parts to a question. Oh, we're starting with a quote from Gurudeva. But eventually we break the shell of the ego, an act symbolized by smashing the rough, dark brown coconut in the temple, revealing the beauty of the pure white fruit inside, which represents our pristine spiritual nature. It takes a hard blow to subdue our ego, and this is never without pain. But we can remove the ego's hard shell painlessly through absolute surrender to Hindu Dharma, absolute surrender to our own soul, to God within us, external worship and internal worship, external surrender and internal surrender, bring about the softening of the ego and the unveiling of spirit. So my response to all of that. I prefer Gurudeva's statement, remove the ego's hard shell painlessly, to the statement, death of the ego. Death is not as pleasant as just removal. It more accurately reflects the Hindu approach. The ego is still there, it is just a more humble ego. Gurudeva gave the answer as to when does it happen, which is through absolute surrender to Hindu Dharma, absolute surrender to our own soul, to God within us. Gurudeva's next sentence indicates it's a gradual process. External worship and internal worship, external surrender and internal surrender, bring about the softening of the ego and the unveiling of spirit. So over time, through external and internal worship, which generates the sense of surrender. And my comment on this is that if a person only thinks of himself or herself as a personality, an ego, and looks at others in the same way, the ego naturally has a hard shell to protect it from other egos. So that's the world. Egos bumping into egos and protecting one another. However, the shell softens when the person also thinks of himself or herself as a soul, a spiritual being. So that makes us more detached from our ego. We're not so prone to feel we have to defend it. Eventually, the person sees everyone as Shiva, which gives the least ego sense. If a person accomplishes this, does this last for the next lives? Or has it to happen many times in many lifetimes. It is like all spiritual accomplishments. We need to accomplish it again in the next life, but it is easier and faster to do so, as we have done it before. Gurudeva gives that example in the Master Course about progressing through Charya, Kriya, Yoga, and Jnana. Once you progress through Charya and Kriya, next time around, you do it more quickly. Next question, how do we move awareness between emotional and intellectual intense experiences? For example, from supporting a family member to a high-level professional task. Ideally, there is some time between the two events during which you could do some deep breathing, go for a short walk, or do the yoga break. If there is no time between the events, then remaining as centered as possible during the emotional family event would help. Question, is there a simple Ganesha Puja blessing / puja for children under 7 who are spiritually inclined and highly energetic? One suggestion is that the parent could chant names of Lord Ganesha and the child could offer rice or flowers with each name chanted. Or it also works for more than one child. Gives them something to do that's fun. Our second topic starts with a review of the end of last Zoom Satsang's presentation. Gurudeva described the achievement in this way. Liberation, moksha, comes when Dharma has been well performed, all our karmas are resolved, and God has been fully realized. Another way of stating God has been fully realized is for an individual to permanently reside in the highest states of divine consciousness. The last idea is the answer to our question, how does Hinduism differ from Western religions? The answer is God needs to be fully realized. Well, that's a review of last time. Then we have the question to you. For today, what do we need to practice to fully realize God? Comes from practice. Are there specific practices we need to do? To answer the question, we'll do the pub desk. Which yoga should I follow? The publisher's desk was written based upon talking to a number of Hindus who were unclear about what they should be practicing. In this first section, we will be exploring the puzzle of the several yogas. And hopefully we will bring together for you all the pieces, giving you a better overview of what can be a confusing array of interpretations. In modern Hindu texts, the most common summary of Hindu spiritual practice is the 4 yogas, karma yoga, path of action, bhakti yoga, path of devotion, raja yoga, path of meditation, and jnana yoga, the path of knowledge. Let's start with a short description of each and then ponder the question, which yoga or yogas should I pursue at this time? Karma yoga can be most simply defined as a path of action and simple service. Begins with refraining from what should not be done. Next, we seek to renounce actions motivated solely by selfish desires, to give up those actions that benefit only ourselves. Then comes a desire to conscientiously fulfill our duties in life. An important aspect of karma yoga is performing selfless service to help others. When we are successful, our work is transformed into worship. And Yoga Swami was very strong on this idea, said all work must be done with the aim of reaching God. Nice statement. In other words, it's not a secular activity. Through the way we do it, it's a spiritual activity. And Bhakti Yoga, as we know, is a path of devotion to and love of God. Practice focuses on listening to stories about God, singing devotional hymns, pilgrimage, intoning a mantra, and worshiping in temples and one's home shrine. The fruition of Bhakti Yoga is an ever closer rapport with the divine, developing qualities that make communion possible: love, selflessness, and purity, eventually leading to prapatti, which is the idea we were talking about before of self-effacement, surrender. So the surrender, the self-effacement developed in Bhakti Yoga softens the ego. Gurudeva gave this insightful description: God is love, and to love God is the pure path prescribed in the Agamas. Veritably, these texts are God's own voice admonishing the samsari, reincarnation's wanderer, to give up love of the transient and adore instead the immortal. How to love the divine, when and where, with what mantras and visualizations, and at what auspicious times, all this is preserved in the Agamas. Raja Yoga is the path of meditation, 8 progressive stages of practice: ethical restraints, religious observances, posture and breath control, sense withdrawal, concentration, meditation, and ecstasy or mystic oneness. Focus is on restraining the modifications of the mind so that our awareness usually takes on the forms of the mind's modifications, can abide in its purest, simplest, essential form. The restraint of these modifications is achieved through practice and detachment. Abhyasa and vairagya. Gurudeva used the term consciousness to explain the modifications of the mind. Consciousness and awareness are the same when awareness is totally identified with and attached to that which it is aware of. To separate the two is the artful practice of yoga. And the last one, Jnana Yoga, is the path of knowledge. It involves philosophical study. Generally, teachers in this tradition will have you learn Sanskrit and study scriptures such as the Upanishads. And it involves discrimination between the real and the unreal. Though the word jnana is derived from the verbal root jna, which simply means knowing, it has a higher philosophical connotation. It's not only intellectual knowledge, but also intuitive experience. It starts with the former and ends with the latter. Jnana Yoga consists of 3 progressive practices: Shravana, listening to scripture; Manana, thinking and reflecting; and Nididhyasana, constant and profound meditation. 4 great sayings from the Upanishads are often the subject of reflection during the Jnana Yoga sadhanas. Consciousness is Brahman. That thou art. The self is Brahman. I am Brahman. Swami Chinmayananda, Chinmaya Mission taught, The goal of Jnana Yoga is, through discrimination, viveka, to differentiate between the real and the unreal, and finally come to realize one's identity with the supreme reality. Having looked briefly at each of the four primary yogas, let's explore how they are approached in various schools of thought. It may surprise you to learn that schools you are familiar with define yoga quite differently. This knowledge may help you to choose the yoga or yogas that is right for you to practice at this stage of your spiritual work. The first and most widely known approach is to choose one of the yogas based on your temperament. Vedanta Society of Southern California puts forth this approach on its website. Spiritual aspirants can be broadly classified into four psychological types. The predominantly emotional, the predominantly intellectual, the physically active, the meditative. There are four primary yogas designated to fit each psychological type. So you've probably heard this. In this approach, Bhakti Yoga is recommended for the predominantly emotional, Jnana Yoga for the intellectual, Karma Yoga for the physically active, and Raja Yoga for the meditative person. However, it is sometimes advised that seekers who are intellectually inclined should stay away from Jnana Yoga. Linda Johnson explains this in her book, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Hinduism. Think you're smart? Surprisingly, Hindu gurus often advise bright people to take up the path of devotion, not Jnana Yoga. That's because very intelligent people often benefit more by learning to open their hearts. Jnana Yoga is not so much for intellectuals as for people with a strongly developed mystical sense and a burning desire for the actual experience of God realization. An excellent insight from Linda. Second approach is to choose one of the yogas as your primary focus, based on your temperament, but to also practice the other three yogas in a secondary way. Swami Shivananda, founder of the Divine Life Society, maintained that though seekers naturally gravitate toward one path, the lessons of each of the paths must be integrated by every seeker if true wisdom is to be attained. The motto of his organization, Divine Life Society, is serve, love, meditate, realize. Reflecting on this concept, we can see that it refers respectively to Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. Third approach emphasizes that one or another of the four yogas is the highest path, should be followed by everyone. It's common for Vaishnava organizations to put forth Bhakti Yoga or devotional practices as the path for all followers. Don't notice, one path for all. That is to say, Vaishnavism focuses on self-transcending love and surrender as the principal means of liberation. In addition, Karma Yoga is advised as a purificatory preparation for the practices of devotion. Sri Ramanuja states that in preparation for meditation or the contemplative remembrance of the divine, one should engage in Karma Yoga. Some Vedantic traditions put forth Jnana Yoga as the path for all. For example, in the Samartha tradition of Adi Shankara, Karma Yoga is performed as a preliminary sadhana, leading one to Jnana Yoga, which is defined as meditation based on philosophical discrimination. This idea is found in Shankara's Viveka Chudamani. Work is for the purification of the mind, not for the perception of reality. The realization of truth is caused by discrimination, not in the least by 10 millions of acts. In other words, you're already the truth. You just haven't found that part of you that is the truth. So you have to look for it, which is the idea of discrimination. Fourth approach is that the practice of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Raja Yoga constitute a prerequisite for taking up Jnana Yoga, experiencing unity with God, enlightenment. Swami Ramakrishnananda of the Vishvadharma Mandalam in New York City wrote, before delving into Jnana Yoga, it is important that a disciple grows and develops in service, or Karma Yoga, in devotion to God, or Bhakti Yoga, and in meditation, or Raja Yoga. Because in studying this philosophy without preparation, one risks transforming oneself into a lip Vedantist, a person who talks about that which he does not truly know. Gurudeva also expresses that idea, that we don't want to approach it in an overly intellectual way and confuse intellectual knowledge about the truth with the actual experience of the truth. Swami Vishnudevananda of Shivananda Yoga Vedanta Centers propounded a similar idea. Before practicing Jnana Yoga, the aspirant needs to have integrated the lessons of the other yogic paths. For without selflessness and love of God, strength of body and mind, a search for self-realization can become mere idle speculation. Same idea, just an intellectual achievement. Gurudeva stated, Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga are the prelude, are the necessary prelude to the higher philosophies and practices. He saw wisdom in this fourth approach and described the four. That's a nice graphic. As stepping stones, each needed for our spiritual progress. He taught that the four yogas, or padas, are cumulative stages and none should be abandoned as one advances on the path. To quote, in Karma Yoga, or the Charyapada, the stage of selfless service, we attend the temple because we have to, because it is expected of us. In Bhakti, the Kriyapada, the stage of worshipful sadhanas, we attend because we want to. Our love of God is the motivation. In the Yogapada, we worship God internally in the sanctum of the heart. Yet even the yogi immersed in the superconscious depths of mind has not outgrown the temple. It is there, God's home on the earth plane, when the yogi returns to normal consciousness. So perfect is the temple worship of those who have traversed the Jnanapada, that they themselves become worship's object, living, moving temples. We never outgrow temple worship. It simply becomes more profound and meaningful as we progress through four spiritual levels, of course, which are Charya, Kriya, Yoga, and Jnana. So the basic point, just to comment on it before we a couple more slides left. Different organizations have different approaches. There's a tendency to think that there's more uniformity between the way different organizations approach the practice of yoga, but they're quite distinct. So Vaishnavism, for example, with its emphasis on the temple, which includes ISKCON, versus Adi Shankara Mayavada Vedanta, its emphasis on scriptural study and discrimination. Totally different approaches. Oh, here it says, still confused as to which yoga or yogas to choose for yourself? Of course, if you have a teacher, this is an excellent point of discussion to have with him or her. If you don't have a teacher, then a conservative approach is to work first on Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. These yogas work swiftly with the ego and clear all important barriers to deeper realization. In other words, this advice is your first practice shouldn't be deep meditation, which is what some modern teachers do. They try to bring you right into deep meditation. This is saying that's not traditional. Tradition is we master Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga first. So we need to clear barriers many neglect to resolve on the path because ego can be difficult to overcome. The benefits of the practice of Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga include a slow purification of the mind developing of greater humility and selflessness, and a growing sense of devotion and certainty that all our actions are steadily moving us closer to God. And ready for our third topic. Sensitivity, which is the 54th character quality of our character building workbook. How would you define sensitivity? The workbook gives this definition. Sensitivity is a delicate appreciation of others' ideas, attitudes, feelings, and natures. I practice it by listening carefully, watching facial expressions, and understanding subtle signs. The opposite is insensitivity. As we progress along the path, we become more and more sensitive. This sensitivity is a wonderful thing. It's like graduating from being an old battery-set radio of the 20s and 30s to a sophisticated solid-state television. The sensitivity that you will begin to recognize is so refined and yet so strong. You have to figure out how to update that. Quote. Next quote from Gurudeva. Being detached does not mean running away from life or being insensitive. Makes us extremely sensitive. When we have the ability to let go, we are warmer, more friendly, more wholesome, more human, and closer to our family and friends. That's the idea of affectionate detachment, rather than being attached. We're affectionately detached, and that makes us stronger. Comparing the actions of one who is sensitive to one who is insensitive. First situation, as a longtime friend confides her marriage difficulties you. Sensitivity, listen carefully to understand her experience in full. Insensitivity, change the subject, feeling you have enough problems and don't need hers. Second situation, at a meditation retreat, everyone is asked to share insights. As each one speaks, you, sensitivity, watch facial expressions and body language as well as the words being spoken. Insensitivity, tune out, figuring this is a time to think about what you are going to say, not to listen to them. Right, that's a big difference in approaching a group activity. Is you don't listen to others, you're developing your own speech. That way you don't really understand what their opinions are, so your speech is limited in its ability to be convincing. Third situation, when your best friend asks for personal insight into an issue, you, sensitivity. Listen with your heart, holding back any judgment. Insensitivity, jump in and question her actions and motives, unaware of her fragility. And reflection, take a moment to identify a few ways in which you could improve in sensitivity. And the assignment during these 2 weeks, in any important discussion, be sure you are aware of and sensitive to the attitudes and emotions of those around you. Thank you very much. Om. Om.